This video tells a fictional story meant to inspire empathy. None of its details reflect real events or scientific facts. And now, let the story begin.
The morning was still wrapped in silence when a soft, deliberate knocking pulled me from sleep. At first, I thought it was just the wind tapping against the worn wooden door of my remote research station, but the sound came again steady, intentional, almost pleading. When I finally opened the door, I found myself staring into the wide, glistening eyes of a 6-month-old elephant calf. It stood there alone, trembling, its tiny trunk lifting as if begging for something I couldn't yet understand. In that instant, I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest, as though the world had just shifted. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when the knocking returned, soft at first, then firmer, echoing through the thin walls of my research station. I blinked into the dim light, trying to separate dream from reality. Out here in the northern stretch of Kenya's wilderness, my mornings were usually shaped by the sounds of life waking across the savanna. The distant rumble of elephants, the yelping of hyenas, slipping home after a night of hunting, the flutter of birds greeting the sun. But this sound didn't belong to any of them. It had rhythm, purpose, and an odd sort of insistence that settled uneasily in my mind. I sat up slowly, rubbing the fatigue from my face. 2 decades of veterinary work had conditioned me to respond to strange sounds. Animals rarely cried for help in obvious ways. Yet something about this knocking felt different, almost as though someone was asking permission to enter. For a moment, I wondered if isolation had finally begun to blur the line between instinct and imagination. But then the knocking came again, sharper, more urgent, and I felt the first flicker of concern raise the hairs on my arms. As I swung my legs over the side of the cot, the cold concrete floor sent a jolt through my tired feet. I reached for the same khaki pants I had worn the day before out here. Practicality outlived vanity, and shrugged on a faded shirt still carrying the scent of eucalyptus from yesterday's fieldwork. Before stepping toward the door, I paused. Poachers never announced themselves, and tourists never wandered this deep into the reserve. The nearest village was more than 20 miles away. Whoever or whatever waited on the other side wasn't supposed to be here. When I unlatched the door and pulled it open, the sunrise spilled across the porch, illuminating a sight that made me freeze in place. Standing barely 3 feet tall, with wrinkled gray skin and a wobbly trunk, was a baby elephant alone, trembling and staring straight into my eyes as if it knew exactly who I was. For a moment, time seemed to stretch thin around us. Young elephants didn't travel alone. They didn't approach humans. They didn't knock on doors. Yet here it was, breathing in small, shaky bursts, its trunk hanging slightly to one side, while its wide eyes searched my face for something I wasn't sure I could give. The vulnerability in its gaze hit me harder than I expected. I had seen elephants injured, angry, panicked, but never one that looked so quietly desperate. As it stepped closer, its tiny trunk extended toward my hand, brushing against my skin with a warmth that startled me. The touch was hesitant, almost questioning, as though it needed reassurance that I was real. I felt a tightening in my throat, surprised by how quickly this small, trembling creature had carved its way into my chest. The calf took a few steps back, then forward again, repeating the movement with uncanny purpose. It wasn't wandering, it was beckoning, calling me somewhere, and as ridiculous as it sounded, I felt that it expected me to follow. I stood there, torn between training and instinct. Our protocols discouraged unnecessary interference. Following a lone calf could put me between it and protective adults. But the way it looked at me, steady, pleading, almost knowing, made hesitation feel like the wrong reaction. The calf waited, its ears giving a nervous flutter as if bracing for disappointment. In that moment, I realized that Whatever had brought it here carried a weight far beyond confusion or chance. I took one step toward it, then another, allowing its silent request to guide me. Looking back, I think that was the moment everything changed, the quiet second when I understood that the wild sometimes asks for help in the only way it knows how. The calf stood a few paces ahead of me, its small frame outlined by the soft morning light spilling through the acacia trees. For a moment, we simply watched each other, suspended in an odd stillness that felt more like a conversation than silence. Its ears twitched at the faint rustle of the wind, but its eyes never left mine. There was intention there, something deliberate, something urgent, and it pulled at me with a quiet power I couldn't ignore. The young elephant lifted its trunk again, curling it toward me before turning its body slightly toward the forest. It took 3 careful steps, glanced back, then returned to where it had been standing. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had spoken aloud. It wanted me to follow. It needed me to follow. I slipped my field pack over my shoulder, uncertain what I was stepping into but unable to deny the wordless plea in its eyes. As I approached, the calf shifted closer, almost leaning into the space beside me. Its breathing was uneven, frantic in a way that suggested exhaustion mixed with fear. Whatever had driven it here hadn't happened long ago. It nudged my leg with its trunk softly, insistently, then turned back toward the tree line. I hesitated only long enough to lock the door behind me. Somehow, leaving it open felt like tempting fate. When I turned, the calf was waiting with a patience that seemed too mature for such a young creature. As we crossed into the forest, a wave of cool, damp air washed over us. The canopy swallowed the light, breaking it into shifting fragments across the ground. Eucalyptus leaves whispered overhead, releasing their sharp, earthy scent as the morning breeze threaded through the branches. The calf walked ahead but stayed close, never drifting far enough for me to lose sight of it. Every few yards, it paused to make sure I was still behind. We moved deeper into the woods, and the chorus of the savanna faded until only the steady crunch of leaves beneath our feet remained. Somewhere in the quiet between our steps, a thought crept in. This calf wasn't lost. It had a destination in mind, and I felt an uneasy tightness settle in my chest, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't yet caught up to. The deeper we went, the more the sounds around us changed. The bird song grew thin, replaced by a low, distant noise I couldn't identify. At first it was faint, almost a tremor beneath the natural hum of the forest, but with each step forward it swelled, subtle, rhythmic, undeniably mournful. The calf heard it before I did. Its ears shot upward, and suddenly its pace quickened. I followed as best I could, pushing aside undergrowth, focusing on the small, gray shape weaving ahead of me. That sound, I'd heard variations of it before in my years of field work, but rarely with this depth of anguish. It was the sound of suffering, layered with desperation. The calf let out a soft, trembling chirp, a sound newborn elephants make only when deeply distressed. My stomach tightened. I wondered how long it had been carrying this fear alone. After nearly 20 minutes of weaving through thick forest, the path narrowed as the trees drew close together. The calf stopped abruptly. It looked back at me, not pleading this time, but bracing as though preparing me for what I was about to see. I stepped up beside it, hearing the mournful sound more clearly now, echoing through the clearing ahead. In that moment, a heaviness I couldn't explain pressed down on my shoulders, as if the forest itself already knew what waited for us and was holding its breath. The calf took 2 small steps forward, then another, leading me toward the source of the cries. Whatever lay beyond that wall of brush, I sensed it would change everything about this morning, and perhaps everything about the way I understood these creatures. I felt a shiver run through me, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable truth that we were walking straight into the heart of the calf's deepest fear. The forest thickened around us as we continued forward, the trees rising like ancient pillars, guiding us into a deeper, more shadowed world. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, landing in trembling patches across the forest floor. The calf stayed close enough for me to hear its breathing, quick, shallow, and strained by something far heavier than exertion. Each time a branch snapped under my boots, it flinched, but never stopped moving. It was driven by purpose, and that purpose was pulling us somewhere the forest didn't want to reveal easily. The air changed first. It grew cooler, heavier, tinged with a faint, metallic scent of damp earth. Every instinct in my body sharpened. Years of fieldwork had taught me that animals sensed danger long before humans did, and the calf's stiffening posture confirmed it. Its small frame lowered slightly, ears angled forward, listening for something only it could interpret. We pushed through a stand of eucalyptus trees, their silver leaves whispering like distant voices overhead. The rhythmic calls of birds faded until only the sound of our movement remained. Without the forest's usual chorus, the silence felt unnatural, too absolute, too expectant. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for us to uncover whatever truth they had concealed. About 10 minutes deeper in, the calf stopped beside a narrow path carved between clusters of overgrown brush. Its tiny feet shuffled nervously as it glanced back at me, trunk trembling. I moved beside it, lowering my posture the way I would with frightened animals, hoping to offer some sliver of reassurance. Its eyes met mine for only a second, but the fear in them was unmistakable, and seeing that fear raw, unprotected, sent a heavy ache blooming in my chest. The mournful sound we had been following drifted through the trees again, closer now, a low, fractured rumble, filled with pain so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground. I had heard elephants in distress before, but never a sound like this one that carried both physical agony and something heartbreakingly emotional. The calf responded instantly. It chirped, a thin, desperate sound that cracked in the middle. Then it broke into a hurried trot, pushing through the brush with renewed urgency. I followed, branches scraping my arms as I forced my way through behind it. The forest abruptly opened into a small clearing, the sudden space startling after the oppressive closeness of the trees. My eyes swept the area automatically, trained to scan for movement, for threats, for answers. But what I saw instead was a stillness that felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy, too full of waiting. The calf took a few steps forward, then stopped at the very edge of the clearing, its trunk curling downward as if gathering courage. It looked back at me once more, almost pleading for me to understand, before turning toward a cluster of thick underbrush at the far side. I approached slowly, sensing that whatever lay beyond those branches had the power to reshape this entire morning into something far larger, far more devastating than I had imagined. The air grew colder still, prickling down my spine. Something inside me tightened, an instinctive warning that I was about to face a reality I wasn't prepared for. And for a brief moment, I found myself hesitating, not because I feared what I might see, but because I felt the weight of the calf's desperation settle into me like a responsibility I could not step away from. I realized then that this wasn't merely a search. It was a plea for rescue, a plea only I had been chosen to answer. The calf pushed through the last curtain of brush, and I followed close behind, bracing myself for whatever had driven it on this desperate journey. The clearing widened, revealing uneven patches of earth and scattered eucalyptus branches that looked strangely disturbed, as if something massive had struggled here. The air felt thick, weighted by a silence too heavy to be ordinary. Then the mournful rumble echoed again, this time rising from below. I stepped forward and saw it. At the center of the clearing yawned a deep pit nearly 3 meters across, its walls steep and reinforced with stones packed deliberately into the soil. A poacher's trap, and at the bottom lay an adult female elephant, her enormous body twisted against the narrow space, her breathing ragged and shallow. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were telling me. She was alive, but barely. Her left front leg was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone likely fractured from the fall. Dark streaks along the earthen walls showed where she had tried to claw her way out, her tusks scraping grooves into the hardened dirt. Hours, maybe days of futile effort. The calf bolted to the edge of the pit with a sound I had never heard before, a piercing, trembling cry that broke into a whimper. The mother lifted her head barely, and a soft, rumbling response drifted upward, weak, fading, but unmistakably meant to comfort. The rawness of that exchange struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Seeing the calf reach toward its mother, trembling with desperation, made my chest tighten so sharply it felt like a physical wound. I knelt at the pit's edge, forcing myself to shift into clinical observation even as the emotional weight threatened to overwhelm me. The mother's dehydration was severe, her breathing labored, her body trembling from shock and exhaustion, but she remained conscious, stretching her trunk every time the calf reached toward her. And I suddenly realized something astonishing. The area around the pit was disturbed in a pattern that didn't match the mother's attempts to escape. Small trenches, scattered piles of torn vegetation, mounds of half-excavated soil, signs of effort far too small to belong to an adult. The calf had been trying to dig her out. I moved along the rim of the pit, studying the signs more closely. A pile of wet leaves lay near the edge, hydration attempts. Patches of freshly gathered grass sat untouched where the calf had dropped them. And then I saw a faint trail in the earth, leading directly from the pit toward the direction of my research station. The calf hadn't stumbled across me by coincidence. It had sought me out deliberately. That realization hit with an intensity that rooted me to the ground. The thought that this tiny creature had assessed the situation, attempted a rescue on its own, failed, and then chosen to find a human, it stirred something deeper than awe. The calf nudged my leg again, its trunk trembling violently. I crouched beside it, laying a hand gently on its head. The warmth of its skin, the frantic rhythm of its breaths. It felt like holding the fear of a child who had done everything it could and still come up short. I felt something inside me break a little at that moment. The mother let out another low rumble, the sound fragile, frayed at the edges. She was clinging to consciousness, perhaps driven only by the presence of her calf above her. I scanned the pit again, searching for any possible way to extract her without equipment. There was none. The walls were too steep, her injuries too severe, the risk too high. I reached for my radio, switching to the emergency frequency as I backed away from the edge to get a stronger signal. The calf stayed pressed against my side, unwilling to let me step too far away. When the call connected, the urgency in my voice came out sharper than I intended. I relayed the situation, provided coordinates, described the mother's condition, and requested immediate deployment of the Kenya Wildlife Service rescue team. When the transmission ended, I lowered the radio and looked down at the calf, which stared at me with wide, trembling eyes. It stepped forward and touched my hand with its trunk, soft, deliberate, grateful, and I felt something stir deep inside me, a recognition that this moment was far greater than a standard rescue. This small creature had placed its hope entirely in me. The mother's rumble weakened again, drifting upward like a fading echo. Standing there beside the calf, I realized that this clearing held more than fear and suffering. It held the absolute, heartbreaking truth of how deeply these animals loved and understood one another. And the weight of that truth stayed with me long after I looked back into the pit. The forest seemed to fall into an uneasy hush after the radio call ended, as if the air itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. The calf hovered beside me, its small body trembling with an anxiety that needed no translation. I moved closer to the edge of the pit again, gauging the mother's condition from above. Her breathing had grown slower, the rise and fall of her chest uneven. Each inhale a battle she seemed to be losing by degrees. I spoke to her softly, not because she could understand my words, but because creatures in pain sometimes responded to tone alone. Her ear flicked weakly at the sound. She knew we were here. She knew she wasn't alone. The calf chirped down to her, a small, fractured sound. The mother's trunk lifted only a few inches in response. That tiny movement, barely perceptible, carried a weight that struck deep. Watching them struggle to reassure each other, even through exhaustion and fear, left a tight ache in my throat. Minutes passed, though they stretched like long cords of tension pulling tighter with every moment. I checked my watch, counting down the time it would take for the rescue team to arrive. 6 hours. It felt impossibly long. The calf paced in a small circle near the pit, its trunk brushing the ground in nervous sweeps. Each time it moved too close to the edge, I gently redirected it, knowing how easily the loose soil could collapse beneath its weight. It leaned into my touch without hesitation, as though I had been part of its world far longer than an hour. I wondered how many nights it had spent alone, trying to comfort a mother who could not rise. The mother's rumble sounded again, but weaker now, thin like a whisper stretched too far. The calf responded immediately, pressing its forehead against the rim of the pit as if trying to close the distance between them. I felt myself holding my breath, wishing I could will strength back into her body. The minutes dragged on, and I found myself studying the calf more closely. The dirt caked along its trunk, the dried streaks of mud on its legs, the weary slump of its posture, none of this belonged to a carefree 6-month-old elephant. This was a child who had fought a battle far too big for its small frame, and the realization reached deeper than I expected. Somewhere in that quiet clearing, I caught myself thinking that resilience wasn't limited to the grown or the strong. Even the smallest beings carried a will to protect the ones they loved, and seeing it here, raw and unfiltered, made me rethink everything I thought I understood about survival. I stepped back from the pit and stood beside the calf, resting a hand gently on its head. It leaned into me again, exhausted, trusting, needing the presence of someone who could help even though it didn't know how. As we waited in the dimming quiet of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile little life had already endured more than most creatures ever would. And I knew the hardest moments were still yet to come. The first hint of help arrived, not through sight, but through sound. A distant, rhythmic vibration rolled through the forest floor, barely noticeable at first. The calf lifted its head, ears spread wide, sensing the tremor long before it reached my own awareness. I recognized it only seconds later, the low mechanical hum of heavy vehicles navigating rugged terrain. Relief should have come easily, but instead it mingled with a sharp edge of worry. Rescue operations were never simple, and even the arrival of the team meant a long, uncertain road ahead. The calf pressed closer to me, its small frame brushing against my leg, as if anchoring itself against the unknown. I rested a hand on its back, feeling the tightness of its muscles beneath my palm. Despite everything it had already endured, the little elephant still held itself ready, ready to hope, ready to fear, ready to protect. There was something profoundly brave in that. Seeing such courage in such a small creature caught me off guard, stirring a feeling far deeper than simple sympathy. Minutes later, the first rescue vehicle broke through the line of trees, followed by 2 more. The engines rumbled loudly, sending birds scattering into the air. Dust swirled around the tires, and I felt the calf flinch at the sudden disturbance. I knelt beside it, murmuring quiet reassurance, until the tension in its body eased. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out of the lead vehicle. Dr. Marcus Wanjiru, one of the most experienced wildlife veterinarians in the Kenya Wildlife Service. His sharp eyes swept across the clearing, taking in the calf, the pit, the scattered evidence of struggle. He moved with practiced urgency, radioing instructions to his team before approaching me. "How long has she been down there?" he asked. "At least 48 hours, maybe longer," I replied. "Dehydration is severe. The fracture looks bad." He nodded grimly, then peered into the pit, his expression tightening at the sight of the mother elephant. "We'll need to sedate her lightly and stabilize her before extraction. The walls won't support machinery near the edge." The team sprang into action, unloading equipment with swift efficiency. Portable hydraulic rigs, reinforced sling systems, medical supplies, everything needed for a rescue that would push every boundary of field operations. The clang of metal and the mechanical whir of machinery filled the air, blending uneasily with the soft whimpers of the calf. The little elephant backed away a few steps, torn between fear and the desire to stay close to its mother. I walked beside it, matching its movements, offering presence, if not answers. It watched every piece of equipment being set up, its eyes darting from the pit to the people to the towering machinery. I wondered what it must be trying to understand in that moment. Dr. Wanjiru prepared the sedative, loading the calculated dose into a dart rifle. The mother elephant needed to be conscious enough to help herself, but calm enough not to injure her already fragile body. It was a narrow line to walk, and we both knew it. When the dart struck the mother's flank, she reacted with a weak rumble, the calf responding instantly with a cry of distress. I placed my hands gently along the calf's trunk, grounding it as best I could. Its fear was palpable, raw, and heartbreakingly innocent. Feeling it tremble against me made the entire situation weigh even heavier than before. As the sedation took effect, the rescue team secured a custom sling system around the mother's torso. The cables stretched across the clearing, anchored far from the unstable pit edge. The crane's engine roared to life, echoing through the forest with a force that made the calf shrink back again. I knelt beside it once more, speaking softly, guiding its trembling breaths back into something steady. Slowly, it inched forward again, refusing to leave its mother's side for long. When I looked to the pit, the mother's eyes were half-lidded but aware, her trunk lifting weakly toward the direction of her calf. It was a gesture small enough to miss, but powerful enough to feel, and it made me hope quietly, desperately, that we might still be in time. The crane's engine rumbled louder as the rigging team tightened each cable, checking and rechecking every connection. Metal clinked sharply against metal, echoing through the clearing like the steady countdown to a moment none of us could fully prepare for. The calf hovered anxiously near my side, torn between fear of the machinery and the need to stay close to its mother. Each loud sound made it flinch, but every time it backed away, it returned a moment later, as if refusing to abandon its vigil. Dr. Wanjiru signaled his team. 2 riggers climbed to safer ground, securing the final anchor points. The sling wrapped around the mother elephant's torso had been adjusted to distribute her enormous weight without placing pressure on her injured leg. Even so, the risk was immense. One wrong calculation, one weakened cable, one shift in her balance, it could undo everything. I watched as the crane operator eased his hands over the controls, his jaw set with focus. The cables tightened with an agonizing slowness, lifting the sling until it hugged the elephant's massive frame. The mother's eyes fluttered halfway open, sedation dulling, but not erasing the pain in her gaze. The calf leaned dangerously close to the pit again, letting out a thin, wavering chirp. The mother responded with a faint rumble, so fragile it barely reached us. That small exchange, soft as it was, carried a gravity that lodged itself deep in my chest. Hearing them call to each other in the midst of so much fear made the moment feel almost unbearably human. The crane engaged, pulling taut against the weight. The cables vibrated under the strain, trembling like great steel nerves. Dust slid down the pit's walls as the mother elephant's body lifted slowly, unevenly, the sling tightening beneath her. Her trunk reached upward in an instinctive gesture of alarm, but sedation kept her calm enough not to fight the lift. She shifted slightly, adjusting herself with what little strength she could summon to help the rigging support her correctly. It was astonishing to witness an animal in such terrible condition still trying to cooperate with her rescuers. The crane operator worked with agonizing precision. Every inch of lift required adjustments. Every shift in weight made the cables groan. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like the whole clearing was holding itself still, afraid to interrupt the delicate balance between danger and hope. Halfway up, the crane jerked slightly as the weight shifted. Dust spilled from the pit's rim. The calf panicked, stumbling backward with a distressed cry. My hand shot out to steady it, though I wasn't sure if I was calming the calf or myself. For a moment, the fear that surged through me felt almost paralyzing. It was terrifying how easily one misstep could destroy everything we were trying to save. But the crane stabilized again, the operator adjusting quickly, his experience showing in the steady return of movement. The mother elephant slowly cleared the edge of the pit, her body suspended in the air like a great, wounded monument. The riggers guided her carefully, using ropes to stabilize her angle and keep pressure off her injured leg. When her rear legs touched solid ground for the first time in days, a shudder rippled through her body. The calf bolted forward, stopping only when it reached her trunk's length, chirping wildly. The mother answered, her rumble still weak, but now steady enough to carry emotion rather than agony. Watching that reunion in real time, those first seconds of relief, connection, and recognition sent a rush of warmth through me that I wasn't expecting. It reminded me that survival isn't just physical. Sometimes it's held together by bonds we rarely take the time to understand. The team lowered her fully to the ground, guiding the sling away as carefully as they had tightened it. Once free, she collapsed onto her uninjured side, her breathing heavy but more stable than before. The calf pressed its head against hers, touching her cheek, her ear, her trunk checking, reassuring, confirming she was truly there. I found myself blinking against a sudden sting in my eyes, overwhelmed not by the danger we had overcome, but by the gentle desperation with which the calf embraced her. In that moment, the forest felt like it had opened its heart, showing us something raw and sacred. But there was no time to linger in emotion. Dr. Wanjiru rushed forward with his team, moving to stabilize the fracture and assess internal damage. The mother elephant needed immediate medical attention if she was to survive long enough to rejoin her herd. As the field hospital took shape around her, the calf stayed close, stepping only a few feet away when absolutely necessary. Each time we shifted equipment or adjusted the mother's position, it watched with unwavering attention, its small body shaking with fatigue and fear. When I knelt beside it, placing a steady hand along its back, it leaned into me slowly, almost gratefully, as if sharing its weight helped keep its hope alive. And standing there, with the forest quieting around us and the rescue team moving with practiced urgency, I felt certain of one thing: we had pulled her from the pit, but the hardest part of saving her had only just begun. The clearing had transformed into a makeshift field hospital, with equipment laid out in careful rows and tarps stretched between trees to create a shaded workspace. The rescue team moved with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for years to handle emergencies in the unforgiving wild. Yet, even with all their experience, the atmosphere remained taut with uncertainty. The mother elephant lay on her side, sedated and breathing heavily as the team examined the extent of her injuries. The calf stayed as close as it dared, pacing tight circles around her head. Every now and then, it reached out to touch her cheek with its small trunk, releasing soft chirps that cracked like fragile threads. The mother responded with faint, low rumbles, too weak to resonate through the clearing but strong enough to reassure her child that she was still there. Watching them felt like witnessing the most delicate form of communication, one built from instinct, devotion, and the kind of love that didn't need words. Seeing that bond so raw and unguarded stirred something deep in me, something I wasn't sure I had the right to feel but couldn't turn away from. Doctor. Wanjiru knelt by the injured leg, his brow furrowed with concentration. The fracture was severe, a clean break but complicated by swelling and the strain of being trapped for so long. The team worked quickly to clean the wound, stabilize the bone, and prepare the materials needed to brace her limb. Improvisation was essential. Out here, they had no sterile operating room, only skill, teamwork, and determination. The calf grew agitated when the team began adjusting the mother's position, letting out a distressed squeal. I stepped toward it instinctively, placing myself between the young elephant and the equipment. It hesitated, then pressed its forehead gently against my side, trembling, feeling its weight lean into me like that, seeking comfort, maybe even trust, made the moment unexpectedly personal. We stayed like that for several minutes while the team worked. The mother's breathing steadied slightly as fluids were administered and her vital signs were monitored. When they began to set the brace around her injured leg, the calf reacted again, reaching out with its trunk to touch her face. The mother responded with another soft rumble, a sound that seemed to wrap around the calf like a blanket. The tenderness of that exchange cut through the tension in the air, reminding all of us why we were fighting so hard to keep her alive. As the procedure continued, I noticed something else, the way the calf watched every movement, every tool, every gesture. Not with fear alone, but with an uncanny awareness, as if trying to understand the purpose behind each action. It made me wonder how much young animals perceived, how much they interpreted beyond instinct. By the time the brace was secured and the sedation adjusted to keep the mother stable, the sun had begun its slow descent. Long shadows stretched across the clearing, and the air cooled with the approaching evening. The calf settled beside its mother at last, resting its head gently against her cheek as the team stepped back to assess their work. In that quiet moment, with the forest growing still around us, I couldn't help but feel that we were witnessing a kind of resilience that belonged not just to survival, but to love itself. The first distant rumble reached us just as the rescue team finished securing the final straps of the brace. It rolled through the forest floor like a muted thunder, subtle yet unmistakable. The calf's ears shot up instantly, its small body stiffening with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the air. A second rumble followed closer this time, and something in the sound carried weight, certainty, and recognition. The herd was coming. I stepped back as the calf let out an excited chirp, its entire posture shifting from exhaustion to alert anticipation. It paced at the edge of the clearing, trunk lifted high to catch every scent drifting on the wind. There was no hesitation in its movements now. Instinct and memory were guiding it. Moments later, the forest parted with the quiet authority only elephants possess. Massive silhouettes emerged from between the trees, their gray forms catching the fading light as they moved in a slow, steady formation. Leading them was a towering matriarch, her tusks long and curved, her gaze sharp with intelligence that seemed to cut through the shadows. The calf rushed forward, stopping only when it reached her trunk's length. It chirped again, frantic and full of relief. The matriarch lowered her head, touching the calf gently, inspecting it with a tenderness surprising for a creature so immense. One by one, The other elephants gathered, brushing their trunks along the calf's body as if confirming it was truly unharmed. Watching that circle of quiet reassurance unfold filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected to feel after such a long, grueling day. Seeing the calf so openly embraced made the exhaustion in my bones feel suddenly insignificant. Then the herd turned its attention to the mother. They approached her slowly, cautiously, reading her scent, assessing her condition. The matriarch lingered beside her the longest, her trunk gliding over the brace, the wounds, the dried mud. It wasn't just examination, it was recognition, acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude expressed in a language far older than ours. The mother responded with a weak rumble, and the entire herd stilled, listening. What followed was one of the most profound moments I had ever witnessed in the wild. The elephants gathered around her in a loose semicircle, their trunks reaching out in soft, deliberate touches. Some brushed her side, others rested their trunks gently against her head. It was a ritual of connection, of support, a silent affirmation that she was still part of them, wounded, but not alone. The matriarch then turned to face me. She stepped closer, her massive presence dwarfing everything around her. When she stopped a few feet away, she lifted her trunk, scenting the air, studying me with an intensity that made the clearing feel suddenly smaller. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she lowered her trunk toward me in a slow, deliberate gesture. It wasn't threat, it wasn't curiosity, it was acknowledgement. Feeling the warm breath from her trunk wash over my hands sent a quiet shiver through me, a reminder of how thin the boundary between species truly is when compassion bridges the space between them. As the herd prepared to move, positioning themselves protectively around the injured mother, I realized that the forest felt different now, lighter, fuller, as if the presence of the herd had stitched something back into place. And I couldn't help but think that perhaps healing didn't start with medicine, but with being seen and accepted by those who mattered most. The forest had begun to dim into the soft tones of early evening by the time the herd gathered itself to move. The mother elephant, though still weak, lifted her head enough to acknowledge the presence of her family. The calf pressed close to her, tracing her cheek with its trunk before stepping back, as if understanding that she needed space to rise slowly and carefully. With the assistance of the herd's gentle nudges and the brace supporting her injured leg, she managed to push herself upright. The moment she stood, however unsteady, sparked a quiet wave of relief across the clearing. I watched as the herd adjusted its formation around her, an instinctive choreography of protection and unity. The calf took its place beside her, its small body leaning lightly against her larger frame. Their steps were hesitant at first, but as they moved deeper into the forest, the rhythm of the herd began to steady. The sound of their footfalls merged with the natural hum of the wilderness, creating a fading echo of resilience. Just before they disappeared into the trees, the calf broke formation. It turned and walked back toward me with slow, deliberate steps. I knelt without thinking, unsure what it intended, but ready for whatever this final moment would be. The calf reached me, lifted its trunk, and touched my face in the same gentle way it had touched my hand that morning. There was no fear in its movement now, only recognition. It lingered for a breath, studying me with eyes far older than its 6 months. Then it turned and hurried after its mother, slipping between the shadows of the trees until its small silhouette vanished completely into the growing dusk. For a long moment, I stayed kneeling in the clearing, listening to the distant rumbles of the herd as they traveled home. I had come here to study elephants, to understand their behavior, but that day, it felt as though they had understood me just as deeply, offering a trust I had never expected to earn. I carried that feeling with me as I walked back toward the research station, the forest now quiet behind me, and I knew that some stories do not end when the danger passes. Some linger because they change the way we see the world. In the end, what stayed with me most was not the rescue itself, but the way a small, frightened calf chose to believe in me when it mattered most. Perhaps the greatest lessons I have learned in the wild came from moments when an animal trusted me long before I believed I deserved it. Compassion is a language shared across species, understood through actions rather than words. The bonds between animals, especially elephants, remind us that family is defined by connection, not circumstance. Protecting wildlife is not only about preserving ecosystems, it is about honoring the emotional lives of creatures who feel more deeply than we often imagine.